We're going to go way back into history. We have had this situation in which Netanyahu actually encouraged Hamas, essentially, because he wanted a dissipated power, a less powerful Palestinian authority. I think that there are a number of steps that have to be taken. Recognition of the state of Palestine has to be one of them. And at the same time, we have to recognise that there is a decades-long history of oppression and occupation. And we also have to recognise that although you're saying Israel is a lovely liberal country in which people can live freely, for the Palestinians, that is sadly not the case.
Hello, Ian, and everybody there. I would like, isn't it, given the International Court justice on Israel, do your judgment with evidence as to what has happened and is happening since 1967, isn't now the time for Sakir to join Norway and Spain and declare Palestine a state, to at least push the lever over in terms of a ceasefire immediately and the beginnings of reparation in every way possible? And especially, we should stop any licensing of even one bullet to go to a racist government that is indiscriminately killing large amounts of people, and including putting the Israeli hostages in severe danger. And what Netanyahu is doing, in my opinion, is doubling down. Okay. And the daily reports of killings in Gaza is also doubling down of his army.
So you're asking this in the context of the ICJ, I think it was the ICC, not the ICJ. Ruling last week that yes, Israeli settlements in the West Bank are in breach of international law. It was the ICJ. Yes. Right. Yes. Okay. Right. Let's go to our panel. Ellie, you start off.
Yes, I mean, I think that ruling is really important because it clearly says that, the Israeli settlement activity, is illegal. The settlement should stop. The occupation should stop. And that's got to be a starting point for building a sustainable peace. I agree with your caller that, we should, as the UK, we should recognise the state of Palestine. And the only solution is a two-state solution.
Why haven't we? Because, David Cameron, when he was Foreign Secretary,
we haven't recognised the state of Palestine. Otherwise, we would have to recognise that Israel is breaking the law by annexing its territory. It's as simple as that, right? We provide diplomatic cover for Israel as one of its strongest allies outside of the United States. We don't want to recognise a Palestinian state until Israel do as part of a peace agreement, because they won't recognise Palestine unless they get to keep the settlements and annex that territory. And the Palestinian state would be recognised based upon the Green Line, which the settlements are illegal past the line of. So they'll stay in limbo forever until Western nations who back Israel admit that the settlements are wrong. But unless they admit the settlements are wrong, they can't recognise the state of Palestine. It's as simple as that. Because as soon as we say we have recognised the state of Palestine, you suddenly have to start sanctioning Israel for its annexation, its illegal annexations. Because at the moment, the ICJ ruling is non-binding. But of course, whether or not it's a binding judgment or not, once we recognise the state of Palestine, we have to recognise where its borders are. And therefore we get into the problem of, is it with the settlements or not? And if it's without the settlements, then that would be a Palestinian state recognition that the Palestinians wouldn't even accept. And if it's with the settlements, that would tarnish our diplomatic agreements with Israel. We're continually leaving this whole discussion in limbo because our own representatives refuse to condemn the settlements in the West Bank. We will punish settlers, but again, do we put pressure on Israel to dismantle the existing ones, which are just as illegal as the new ones and the outposts? All of these are illegal, just as illegal as each other. There is nothing that separates Gush Etzion and Malia Dumim from all of the new outposts that have been formed over the last 2 years or whatever it is. Nothing separates them in legal speak in terms of where their position is in international law. And as soon as we say, well, the outposts are wrong, we have to say the largest, earliest settlements are all wrong as well. And we won't do that, because then we would have to break off diplomatic ties with Israel, and we don't want to do that because it's our outpost in the region.
He sort of alluded to wanting to do it. Labour are saying, well, we do want to do it, but not quite yet. And as Pauline says, Ireland and Norway have already done it. So if they've done it, why haven't we?
Well, precisely. Perhaps that's a question you can put to David Lammy next time you have him on your show.
Well, I've got the next best thing, Christina McAnee.
I'm not a Labour spokesperson, by the way, just so you know.
But you're the nearest that we've got.
But yeah, I completely agree. We've been calling for the Labour government, I have to change my language now, to recognise Palestine. Without a doubt, that needs to happen. I said that in my last contribution. And when the what's happening in the West Bank is appalling. I mean, there's no doubt about it. You see what the settlements are encroaching more and more on the cities and people who live there. You can see that wall that's been built. I was astonished when we were driving past that. I couldn't believe I was in a country where there was such a huge, disgusting looking wall to separate people. It was almost like, keep these people behind bars, behind the wall. Don't let them contaminate Israel. And I know lots of Israeli people don't feel that way.
It's an apartheid state. What you're describing, Christina, is an apartheid state. Israel is an apartheid state. We finance and give diplomatic cover for apartheid. This is the ICJ's ruling. And again, if we acquiesce to the ICJ's recommendations on the illegality of the settlements by recognising the Palestinian state as being the 1967 Green Line, we also have to acquiesce to the ruling that it's an apartheid state. And we don't want to do that because that means we have been giving decades of international diplomatic cover for an apartheid state. And we suddenly become international pariahs. I mean, more so than we already are.
They actually don't want that to happen. But, people who are running Israel at the moment, Netanyahu and his cronies, some of them are they are fascists by and large in some way. The way that they talk about Palestinian people, they talk about them almost, I've heard people talk about them as almost subhuman. And we heard a bit of that after the 7th of October last year. And, what happened on the 7th of October was appalling. And, I don't know anyone who was joyful about that. But then a few days later, you started to hear Israelis talking about, some Israelis talking about Palestinians almost like subhumans. And that, I think there is an element of that within Netanyahu's government. But there are decent people in it.
The problem is, of course, is that throughout this conflict, people have seen loads of footage of the barbarity of what Israel have done in Gaza over the course of the conflict. And this is, of course, scandalous. It's ethnic cleansing, war crimes, which are all atrocities. But there's not been as much of a discussion about what's going on in the West Bank. Settlers torching fields of olive trees, cementing water wells that the Palestinians use and trying to take that territory, people being forced from their homes, Israelis throwing litter over the fence at the Palestinians, for example. And again, Christina is right. They talk about the Palestinians as if they're animals. Talking about putting these people on a diet, measuring the calorie counts of the people in the Palestinian territories. And she's right to call them fascists as well. It's palingenetic ultranationalism. That's the textbook definition of fascism. And that's what you get when you live in an ethno-state. That is the ideology that you breed in an ethno-state, regardless of whether or not that you think there was initial justification for the creation of that ethno-state to ensure the safety of the Jewish people at the time. But instead of it being a method of protection, it's become a method of aggression. It's become an expansionist, ethno-nationalist, fascist ideology built upon ethnic supremacy. I'm sorry, this is textbook fascism, and she's right to call it that.
Israel who just don't feel that way.
Sure. But it'd be nice to have a word saying about Hamas in that they think exactly.
Will you condemn hummus? Will you condemn hummus, Christina? How dare you not condemn hummus?
The same way, in that fascistic way, about Israeli and Jewish people.
I completely agree, but Hamas are already recognised as a terrorist organisation. Israel is a recognised state, country. It's allowed to. It's part of the international community. I'm sorry, but people do expect more from countries that have that recognition. Hamas is not a recognised government or organisation. It's an organisation that is determined to get rid of Israel. They're an organisation that have managed to. They've got rid of most trade unions in Palestine. They don't support trade unions at all. When I met the Palestinian president and Palestinian ministers when I was there, they have no truck with Hamas, and they're very clear that they do not support the killing of one single innocent person
in Israel. It'd be nice if they're a bit more vocal.
Because what's interesting as well is that this was in the context of the West Bank. The ICJ ruling that Ian Dale mentioned at the start of this very question, this segment, was about the settlement operations and the outposts that are being created in the West Bank. Nothing to do with Hamas. You say, why don't you talk about some condemnation of the actions of Hamas? And I'm just like, they don't operate in the West Bank. This was a question about the West Bank and the ICJ rulings over the annexation of places in Area C. Hamas are irrelevant to this conversation. But this centrist both sides nonsense is just like, well, you've just not done your daily condemnations of Hamas, have you, Christina?
Local though, wouldn't it? Because you very rarely hear from them in condemning what Hamas are doing or have done.
Well, seriously, I was in the room. We had an hour's meeting with the president of the Palestinian president, and he was very vocal about that. And he was totally unequivocal in his condemnation of Hamas and saying that that is not what Palestinian people stand for, and they did not support the killing of any innocent civilians.
Okay.
It seemed to be what the feta negotiator said in Beijing, but there you go. But then Ian says, like, oh, well, why don't the Palestinians, the West Bank, condemn Hamas? I'm like, because who else is going to be fighting their corner when it's clear that the Palestinian Authority have cucked themselves out to Israel? It's clear that the Palestinian Authority have no intention of properly opposing the Israeli actions and are essentially a protection racket at this point. Attacks on civilians are always bad when Israel or Palestine do it. It's as simple as that. But the reason why people, even in the West Bank, support for Hamas is very high in comparison to Fatah is because, again, the Palestinian Authority have decided that they don't want anything to do with actually representing the interests of the Palestinians. They've not fought for an end to the occupation. They're very happy sitting pretty with the money they get to be the representatives of the Israeli government as part of the Palestinian Authority. Have they betrayed their role they historically had in the PLO and their goal of creating a Palestinian state? When was the last time you saw Mahmoud Abbas stand up to Netanyahu? He never does it. If there was a proper force who was there taking an aggressive diplomatic position in favour of the Palestinians in the West Bank, they would support it. There is still unified support across both the West Bank and Gaza for Marwan Barghouti, but he's stuck in an Israeli prison. He would certainly win a presidential election over anyone from Fatah or Hamas if one was held across a unitary government anytime soon.
Jerry Scott.
Yeah, I think for your caller to suggest that recognising a Palestinian state would lead to an immediate ceasefire is probably wishful thinking. It's a lot more complex than that, and that wouldn't happen straight away, right? It would be nice, but I don't think that would happen. So I think it's a bit more complicated than that. I think that actually the reason why maybe our government hasn't gone that far yet is because of essentially what is a knee-jerk reaction, right? Labour's history in the last few years with anti-Semitism has made it really, really reluctant to put even what it could consider is a foot wrong. And that's not to say that it would or wouldn't be a foot wrong, but that is the thinking that's going on. And, we saw this, I know it's an overused term.
It's almost like chat, but that was the point. It's almost like people were deliberately accusing somebody who was pro-Palestinian of being a dyed-in-the-wool anti-Semite, try and cause such a scandal within the Labour Party so that they essentially couldn't take a pro-Palestinian position ever again, lest they be accused of anti-Semitism like they were from 2015 to 2019. It's like that was the entire point of the anti-Semitism allegations.
But this Ming Vase strategy during the election, I think with this issue in particular, you are seeing that continue into government, and they're trying to walk a tightrope. I'm not sure it's quite working, and I think that will only become apparent when it starts being challenged at the ballot box. I touched on it a little bit in my previous answer, but I think if you really do some analysis on the reduced majorities of people like, Shabana Mahmood in Birmingham Ladywood, things like that, senior figures in the Labour Party are going to realise that they have to address this issue if they're going to hold on to their seats. It's as simple as that. It comes down to pure electoral maths.
I mean, Andrew, you represent a seat in East London. I don't know what the demographics of your seat are, but has this been an issue with you?
I represent a seat in Essex. We're told we're East London, but we're not. We're very much Essex.
You want to be pernickety.
Well, it's actually true.
I speak as an Essex boy.
Well, I don't think if you come to Romford, you'll find many people that want to be described as East London. We are definitely Essex. But let me tell you this is the most one-sided debate I've ever sat in. You are talking about a democratic liberal country where they have elections, where there is free speech, where people can live as they choose.
I'm sorry. First of all, they can't live as they choose. When was the last time anybody had a gay marriage in Israel? Second of all, there's free speech. The country where people get thrown in jail for supporting terrorism, for even saying that the war might be bad or that the Palestinians deserve to be treated like humans. Yeah, a real free speech country Israel is. Again, literally, the ways in which they will launder Israel's reputation about their internal politics based upon essentially the propaganda that they pump out to the West, the Hasbara that they pump out to Western audiences, and they say, look, it's a beacon of democracy. Nothing's wrong there at all. No weird judicial reforms or draconian speech policy. So much free speech for journalists, especially Palestinian journalists too. On top of that, it's not a liberal democracy, it's an apartheid state. And the ICJ has ruled that it's an apartheid state.
There isn't this control over people's lives that you get in most other countries in the Middle East. You have a free society. I've been to Israel many times. I've also been to Palestine. But of course, Palestine, as is being described, doesn't really exist. It's never been a country of its own. The Palestinian people were always Bedouin people. They travelled around the Middle East. And I'm afraid that this is being used as a political weapon to attack Israel. The real agenda here.
I really fucking hate this line. People say this shit all the time and it drives me round the bend. Well, Palestine was never a country. Well, it was an area. Like, why does it have to specifically be a nation state for it to classify as somewhere that the people live in it get self-determination or not? The liberal fucking fetishization of the nation state as a polity drives me round the fucking bend. Oh, well, like, it's just like saying, oh, well, technically North America wasn't a country, so Manifest Destiny is fine. There was no nation state of the Native Americans. They were just living in tribes, so it was fine for the Americans to go there and colonize and ethnically cleanse loads of people and do loads of genocides, because it wasn't a nation state. The nation state is not the be-all and end-all of how you create polities. Just because it never existed in the very specific concept of a modern nation state doesn't mean that it doesn't fucking exist.
Is to destroy the state of Israel from the river to the sea. That is what they really want to do. Very close to having...
Nation states exist to serve a human utility. That's it. That's all they serve to do. There is nothing sacred about them. Dissolving the state of Israel and creating a unitary state, which is multi-ethnic, multi-religious, secular democracy, for example. What's wrong with that? Again, it's going to be difficult. And again, I think the two-state solution is easier. That's probably the method I think that we need to get to quickest, for example. But he says, like, dissolving Israel is just like some kind of historical, like, atrocity. And I'm like, no. Nation states should only exist as long as they serve utility to exist. It's really funny how a bunch of these people who get mad about the phrase, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. They get mad because they say, oh, well, this would involve ethnically cleansing Jewish people out of Israel. And no, it's about freedom from Palestinians, and it's about dissolution of the Zionist entity. And again, people from both the left and the right of Palestinian politics have been clear that a future one-state solution would involve multiple different races and ethnicities living there. It would not involve removing Jews from the land of Palestine, but what it would do would be dissolve the Zionist ethno-state. Now, I know that people like Hamas, for example, and the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, both believe it should be an Arab state with a Jewish minority, and I disagree with them, and I think that they're wrong. Because the Israelis want to create an ethno-state. The Palestinians don't. If they want to maintain a Jewish majority, they have to ethnically cleanse Palestinians from Judea and Samaria to create Greater Israel. Yet, Palestinians, who are very happy living alongside Jewish people in a future unitary state, do not want to ethnically cleanse Israelis. That's not a thing that they want to do. And people think that the Palestinians want to do what Netanyahu wants to do. And I'm like, no. You can have a nation state which isn't an ethno-state. Like, one of these sides want an ethno-state and the other doesn't. Only one of these solutions requires ethnic cleansing. And spoiler alert, it's not the Palestinian solution.
Peace agreements with many other countries in the Middle East, and that's when Hamas decided to attack Israel on the 7th of October. The violence could end completely tomorrow. If Hamas end the violence, lay down their arms, declare that they actually want to end all that, and then have a serious long-term agreement whereby the Palestinian people will get support from the Arab countries, by the way. They don't do anything for Palestine. A lot of money coming in from the Western countries, then allow them to live in a peaceful, democratic society. You can't recognise a country called Palestine when it's being controlled by Hamas. This is a terrorist organisation.
It's not being controlled by Hamas. Hamas are the de facto governing party of Gaza, but the West Bank is controlled by Fatah. And a unitary Palestinian state across both of them would have a unitary government.
So we simply need to get real about the situation there. This will never end until Hamas are gone. When Hamas have gone, when Iran stops interfering and funding Hezbollah and funding Hamas, then we have a real chance. Until that happens...
Hamas exists because there's no state, Andrew. The reason why Hamas exists is because the Palestinians have been dispossessed and continually get further dispossessed. This is why Hamas exists. They are the opposition. They are the only existing opposition to the Israeli occupation because Fatah have completely removed themselves from the equation by cucking out to Israel. If Israel ended the occupation, Hamas's raison d'etre would go away. The support for Hamas only exists because they are the only vector with which Palestinian nationalists can actually put forward a case for their own self-determination, because nobody else represents them at all. If Israel had just not done an occupation or had ended it way before now, all the opportunities they could have given a reasonable deal for the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza, Hamas would not be able to corral any support because all of their support exists as a function of the occupation. There's a reason why their support massively increased after October the 7th or after the Second Intifada. Is because they were the ones who were showing themselves to be putting forward a real case for Palestinian liberation, which none of the diplomatic means had gotten to because Israel kept fucking blocking it.
This will carry on. So the quicker Hamas goes, the quicker we can help the real Palestinian people that need that support. And I'd like to support them. I'd like to give the Palestinian people the right of self-determination, but they've got to be a peaceful, democratic country.
Ellie, you want to come in?
Yeah, I just think, Andrew's just put forward himself a very one-sided argument there.
Well,
and I think
there's
an equivalent...
So we've had two callers and three panellists.
I started off by very, very clearly condemning the violence of Hamas and saying both parties need to come to the table and
negotiate. But you've given your opinion
ceasefire.
just as he has.
Yes, absolutely. But I'm saying that he accused us of having a very one-sided opinion and he's just given one. And so an example of that, I think...
let's be fair, there's no one else on the panel arguing.
I did let you finish your sentence. I did let you finish your sentence. So, you talked about wishful thinking on the part of a caller, and I think it is wishful thinking to say you just get rid of Hamas and then everything's hunky-dory in Israel and Palestine. The issue is that there are really long-standing grievances on both sides. The most powerful book that I've ever read on Israel and Palestine had this refrain, which is from Israeli and Palestinian peace activists. This will not be over until we talk. So it isn't a solution just to say we just bomb the hell out of Hamas and then it'll all be solved.
But who do you talk to? That's the problem, isn't it?
Well, I mean, if we're going to go way back into history, we have had a situation in which Netanyahu actually, really kind of encouraged Hamas, essentially, because he wanted kind of dissipated power, a less powerful Palestinian authority. I think that there are a number of steps that have to be taken. Recognition of the state of Palestine has to be one of them. Building up the peaceful voices within the Palestinian community and recognising that this isn't just about one-sided violence. Absolutely, the 7th of October attacks were horrific. Absolutely, those hostages.
I mean, I would go even further. It's not just about one-sided violence. It is one-sided occupation and the material reaction to that occupation. That's it, right? We can sit here and condemn Hamas all we want. We can sit here and say October the 7th was bad, all we want, right? But unless you recognise that it's a material reaction to the occupied nature of Palestine, we won't recognise why it's existed in the first place. No occupation, no terrorism. It's as simple as that. Again, it's not a justification. Material analysis is not justification. To say this is why something happened is saying this is good that this happened. But if you don't give people a route to peaceful solutions, they will choose violent solutions. And that's what's happened. And Ellie is absolutely correct to say that Netanyahu helped foment this by, as leaked documents have now shown, by essentially allowing and encouraging money to get funneled to Hamas through Qatar to try and destabilise the governance of Palestine between Gaza and the West Bank. That was an explicit plan. They believe in Israeli nationalism from the river to the sea, to their inalienable historic right to Judea and Samaria. They believe this wholeheartedly. And they do not want an end to the war. They do not want a two-state solution. Their motion of rejecting the two-state solution was put through by the Knesset. It's as simple as that. Israel are the ones who are blocking the solution here.
must be released immediately. And at the same time, we have to recognise that there is a decades-long history of oppression and occupation. And we also have to recognise that although you're saying Israel is a lovely liberal country in which people can live freely, for the Palestinians, that is sadly not the case. We have to recognise the grievances on both sides, and we have to act with even-handedness, essentially, to engage in doing what we can as the UK to contribute to resolution of this very long-standing conflict.
If you enjoyed the video, make sure that you like and leave a comment. That helps the video out in the algorithm. If you subscribe and ring the bell, it'll let you know when I go live. I stream every day on YouTube and Twitch. You can also follow all of my socials down in the description. And if you want to support me in a more financial manner, there's a join button for membership to just 99p to be a member on YouTube, as well as a Patreon, and there's some merch there as well. And hopefully I'll catch you on the next video. Take care.